When Sean Diddy Combs was finally taken into federal custody after nearly a year of lawsuits, accusations, and disturbing revelations, the public reaction wasn't shock. It was recognition. Because for a long time, something about Diddy didn't feel right. You didn't need secret knowledge or insider access to sense it. The clues were always there, scattered across interviews, rumors, lawsuits, industry whispers, and moments that were brushed off as weird or uncomfortable, rather than confronted. Inappropriate relationships that raised eyebrows. Long-running rumors about violence, intimidation, and exploitation. A constant hunger for attention. A carefully curated image that felt almost aggressive in how hard it tried to look positive. And yet, for decades, none of it stuck. Diddy was always protected by the same thing that shields so many powerful figures: money, influence, and proximity to even more powerful people. He wasn't just a celebrity, he was a gatekeeper, a kingmaker, someone who could make careers or quietly end them. So when the lawsuits started coming in, one after another, each worse than the last, it didn't feel like a sudden collapse. It felt like gravity finally doing its job. By the time federal charges entered the picture, the narrative had already shifted. This wasn't about a single bad decision or a messy personal life. This was about an alleged pattern, an alleged system, an alleged empire built on fear, silence, and control. And the moment that empire cracked, a much more dangerous question surfaced. Not just what did Diddy do, but who knew? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Diddy didn't operate in the shadows. He operated in plain sight. His life was a constant parade of celebrities, politicians, athletes, executives, and artists. His parties were legendary. His connections were endless. His presence was everywhere. And when someone like that falls, it forces everyone to look backward. Every photo, every video, every speech, every smiling face standing next to him. Suddenly, the silence from his peers became louder than any accusation. People who normally rush to microphones, celebrities who never miss an opportunity to speak out, influencers who build entire brands on standing for justice, gone, quiet, nowhere to be found. And silence, in a case like this, doesn't feel neutral. It feels strategic. That's why this story isn't just about Diddy. It's about the culture that allowed him to thrive, a system where image matters more than morality, where speaking out costs more than staying quiet, where power protects power. And that's exactly why names like Jay-Z and Beyonce keep coming up. Not because there is public proof tying them to crimes, there isn't, but because they symbolize the highest level of industry power, the inner circle, the people who don't just attend rooms, they control them. When people look at Jay-Z and Beyonce, they don't just see artists, they see business empires, strategic silence, perfect brand management, total control over narrative. And in moments like this, control becomes suspicious. Because when someone as deeply embedded in the industry as Diddy allegedly runs wild for decades, the idea that everyone around him was completely clueless becomes harder and harder to accept. This is where 50 Cent enters the conversation. Love him or hate him, 50 has always done one thing consistently. He says the part everyone else refuses to say out loud. He doesn't play the respectable silence game. He doesn't protect industry relationships. He weaponizes humor, mockery, and repetition until a question becomes impossible to ignore. For years, people dismissed 50's comments about Diddy as beef, as trolling, as attention-seeking. But once lawsuits turned into federal charges, those old comments felt different. They felt less like jokes and more like warnings people didn't want to hear. And the more people revisited old interviews, old clips, and old rumors, the clearer it became that Diddy's reputation wasn't built overnight. It was managed carefully. Behind massive donations, public activism, charter schools, awards, and speeches about purpose and community, there was always an undertone that something darker existed beneath the surface. Diddy loved to talk about purpose. He once claimed that God sent him a mission, that he was meant to uplift, inspire, and lead. that he was here to save his community. But that narrative collapses when you line it up against the long history of exploitation claims, abusive business practices, and allegations from people who were closest to him. Artists who signed deals that left them broke, associates who described intimidation and fear, women who later described cycles of control, violence, and coercion. And once Cassie Ventura's lawsuit became public, the image shattered completely. Her claims weren't vague, they weren't subtle. They painted a picture of years spent trapped in an abusive dynamic that allegedly extended far beyond a toxic relationship. When that lawsuit was settled quickly, it didn't quiet the conversation. It ignited it. Because settlements don't erase questions, they amplify them. And soon after, more people came forward: producers, former employees, artists, anonymous accusers. Each new filing expanded the scope of the story. Some claims were challenged, some were dismissed in part, some were allowed to move forward, but the volume alone was enough to change public perception. Then came federal involvement. When the Department of Homeland Security and federal prosecutors step into a celebrity case, the public understands one thing: this is no longer about headlines. This is about evidence: phones, messages, financial records, travel history, witness testimony. Federal cases don't move fast, but they move deliberately. And while Diddy remained publicly defiant, denying wrongdoing and dismissing accusations as money grabs, prosecutors were quietly building something much bigger. That's when the narrative crossed a line it could never come back from. Racketeering, sex trafficking, transportation for prostitution, those aren't words associated with celebrity scandals. They're words associated with criminal enterprises. And once that framing exists, the conversation inevitably expands outward, because enterprises don't exist in isolation. They rely on silence, on helpers, on people who don't ask questions, on people who benefit without getting their hands dirty. That's why the industry's reaction became the story, or rather, the lack of reaction. No passionate defenses, no emotional denials, no "I had no idea" statements, just distance, disappearance, erasure. And that's when the internet began asking the question nobody wants to answer. If Diddy was truly acting alone, why is everyone acting afraid? Because fear doesn't come from association. Fear comes from implication. And as this case moves closer to trial, with more evidence expected to surface, one thing is already clear: this isn't just the fall of one man. It's a stress test on an entire system. And in the next part, the focus shifts from what Diddy allegedly did to why the most powerful people in entertainment seem terrified to say anything at all. The silence that followed Diddy's arrest was deafening, not because people didn't have opinions, but because the people who usually never shut up suddenly had nothing to say. No statements, no distancing interviews, no carefully worded "I condemn all abuse" posts that celebrities love to release the moment a scandal breaks. Nothing. And that absence became the loudest signal of all. Because in Hollywood, silence is rarely accidental. It's calculated, it's legal, it's strategic, and most importantly, it's self-protective. If someone you barely knew turned out to be a monster, you would rush to say you had no idea. You would tell the world you were shocked. You would separate yourself immediately. But when someone you knew well is exposed, the instinct changes. You don't rush, you freeze, you wait, you listen, you watch who speaks first, you consult lawyers, you scrub social media, you disappear. That's exactly what happened here. The absence of support for Diddy wasn't surprising. What was surprising was the absence of denial from people who had spent decades next to him. That's why the internet didn't focus on strangers. It focused on peers. Jay-Z and Beyonce were never accused of crimes in this case. There is no lawsuit naming them, no charges, no official allegation tying them to wrongdoing. But culturally, they represent something else entirely. They represent the final level of power. They represent the people who don't just survive scandals, they outlast them. the people who don't react emotionally, the people who move quietly, strategically, and always in their own interest. Jay-Z and Diddy didn't just know each other. They came up in the same era. Same circles, same rise, same rooms, same deals, same award shows, same champagne-filled private moments celebrating Black excellence and industry domination. And when Diddy fell, people expected something, anything, from Jay-Z. A statement, a condemnation, a distancing. Instead, there was nothing. And in the vacuum of silence, speculation rushed in. Because when someone as controlled as Jay-Z chooses not to speak, people assume there's a reason, not guilt, but risk. Risk of being asked follow-up questions. Risk of being pulled into a narrative you can't control. Risk of being asked what you knew, when you knew it, and why you never spoke up. And Beyoncé's silence made it even louder. Beyoncé rarely speaks on controversy unless it aligns perfectly with her brand and timing. Her team is famous for precision, for restraint, for never reacting impulsively. So when she didn't move, people assumed she was being protected, not from accusations, but from association. And association is dangerous in a case like this, because the deeper this story goes, the clearer it becomes that Diddy didn't operate like a lone wolf. He operated like a hub, a center of gravity that pulled people into his orbit. Artists, models, executives, politicians, athletes, media figures. His parties weren't underground. They were famous, documented, bragged about, referred to casually in interviews and podcasts like they were just another weekend activity. And when you combine that visibility with the allegations, the question becomes unavoidable. How could nobody notice? People don't want to hear this part, but it matters. Predators don't survive in environments where people ask questions. They survive in environments where people don't want to know. That doesn't mean everyone involved was participating. It means many people may have chosen comfort over confrontation. Because confrontation costs careers. Diddy had a reputation long before his arrest, a reputation for revenge, for intimidation, for making examples out of people who crossed him. Stories of threats, of violence, of cars being destroyed, of people being frozen out of the industry overnight. Whether every story is true or exaggerated doesn't change the outcome. Fear works. Fear creates silence, and silence creates space for abuse to continue. That's why this case feels bigger than Diddy. Because when federal prosecutors talk about racketeering, they aren't just talking about acts. They're talking about structure, a structure where power protects itself, where victims feel isolated, where witnesses stay quiet, where people who know something convince themselves it's not their responsibility. And the longer it went on, the more untouchable Diddy appeared. He didn't retreat from the spotlight. He leaned into it. Awards, speeches, documentaries, rebrands, public charity. He rebranded himself as Love, as if changing the name could change the past. He talked about healing, purpose, God, community, redemption. And the more he spoke, the more it felt like overcompensation. Because truly innocent people don't usually need to convince the world of their goodness this aggressively. Meanwhile, lawsuits kept coming. Rodney Lil Rod Jones filed a suit alleging a disturbing environment behind the scenes of music production. He described alleged sexual misconduct, drug use, intimidation, and coercion. Some of his claims were challenged, some were dismissed, some were allowed to proceed. The public didn't care about procedural nuance. They cared about pattern. They cared about repetition. They cared about the fact that different people from different backgrounds with different relationships to Diddy were describing eerily similar dynamics: control, fear, humiliation, power. And when Cassie's lawsuit was followed by video evidence that appeared to support parts of her claims, something shifted permanently. Denial stopped working, apologies came too late, and still, Diddy's inner circle didn't speak. His family defended him publicly. His lawyers attacked accusers aggressively. His statements framed everything as lies, extortion, and conspiracies. But the industry remained quiet. That's when the speculation escalated beyond Diddy. Because when nobody speaks, people assume everyone is protecting something. And that's where names like Oprah, Ellen, Leonardo DiCaprio, LeBron James, Meek Mill, the Kardashians, and others started circulating. Not as accused criminals, but as symbols of proximity. People began asking if these figures were comfortable around Diddy for years. What does that say about how power works in entertainment? And more importantly, how many people stayed quiet because speaking up would threaten their own empire? This is the darkest part of the story. Not the crimes themselves, but the ecosystem that allows them to exist. An ecosystem where reputation matters more than reality, where public perception outweighs private suffering, where the cost of speaking up is higher than the cost of silence. Because Hollywood isn't built on morality, it's built on access. Access to money, access to influence, access to opportunity. And Diddy controlled access. So when the access disappeared, when the federal government stepped in, everyone scattered, phones stopped ringing, invitations vanished, friendships evaporated, and the same people who once surrounded him suddenly acted like they barely knew him. That's not loyalty, that's survival. And now, as Diddy sits in federal custody awaiting trial, the question isn't whether his career is over. It is. The question is whether he'll stay quiet. Because if this truly was an enterprise, if there truly was a network, if there truly were people who knew and did nothing, then Diddy holds something more valuable than money. He holds leverage. And the fear that he might talk is the unspoken reason everyone else won't. In the next part, we're going to talk about the women at the center of this story, because they are the key to understanding what really happened behind closed doors and why this case refuses to stay buried. If you really want to understand what was happening behind closed doors, you have to stop looking at the red carpets and start looking at the women. Because throughout Diddy's entire rise, the most consistent source of insight into his private life wasn't his business partners or his friends. It was the women who spent years next to him, away from cameras, away from applause, away from protection. They are the ones who saw the pattern before the public ever did. Kim Porter was one of the most important people in Diddy's life. They were together on and off for more than a decade. They shared children. He adopted her first son. By all outward appearances, she was family. Kim wasn't just Diddy's partner. She was a model, an actress, a mother, and someone deeply embedded in his personal world. She saw him when there were no cameras, no interviews, no PR teams crafting statements. So when Kim Porter died suddenly in 2018 at just 47 years old, officially from pneumonia, people were stunned. Young, wealthy, access to health care, living in Los Angeles. Pneumonia isn't impossible, but it raised questions. Questions that didn't go away. At first, the public reaction was sympathy. Diddy publicly mourned her. Emotional posts, heartfelt tributes, statements about losing his soulmate. The grief appeared real. But then the rumors started. Whispers that Kim had been working on a tell-all book. Rumors that she knew things she planned to reveal. Claims that her death wasn't as simple as it seemed. None of that has ever been proven. But the timing, the circumstances, and what we now know about Diddy's alleged behavior toward women caused people to look back with new suspicion, especially when reports surfaced that her autopsy took months to finalize, especially when internet researchers started connecting dots that may or may not exist, and especially when a fake memoir, falsely attributed to Kim Porter, briefly shot to the top of Amazon's bestseller list before being exposed as fiction. That fake book muddied the waters badly. It made real questions harder to separate from conspiracy. It allowed defenders to dismiss everything as nonsense. But the underlying discomfort remained. Because even without conspiracies, Kim Porter's story ends tragically. And tragedy, when paired with secrecy, never stays quiet. Then there's Jennifer Lopez. J-Lo was with Diddy during one of the most chaotic periods of his life. Their relationship was high profile, volatile, and ended badly. She was present the night of the infamous club shooting that sent Shine to prison for nearly a decade. Diddy testified. Shine went away, careers were destroyed, and over the years, Jennifer Lopez has been extremely careful when speaking about that era. Recently, when asked about Diddy amid the new allegations, she walked away. No comment, no reflection, no defense, which is understandable, but silence always invites interpretation. Because if nothing happened, people expect you to say nothing happened. Walking away suggests discomfort, not guilt, but distance, and distance is telling. But the woman who changed everything was Cassie Ventura. Cassie wasn't just a girlfriend. She was signed to Diddy's label. Her career, finances, and personal life were deeply entangled with his power. Her lawsuit alleged more than abuse. It alleged control. Control over her body, control over her movements, control over her finances, control over her identity. She described a relationship that allegedly involved coercion, surveillance, violence, and sexual exploitation over a period of more than a decade. When that lawsuit dropped, it detonated the narrative. Not because it was the first accusation, but because it was detailed, documented, and specific. And when it settled within 24 hours, people didn't see closure. They saw confirmation. Then came the video, footage that appeared to corroborate part of Cassie's claims, footage that removed any remaining doubt that something deeply wrong had happened. At that moment, denial became impossible. But the story didn't stop with Cassie. More women came forward. Dawn Richard, a former member of Danity Kane, alleged abusive behavior and described a culture of fear. She claimed she witnessed Diddy abuse Cassie and said she herself was mistreated. Other lawsuits followed, some anonymous, some public. Some involved adults, some alleged encounters when victims were underage. Some claims were shocking, others were horrifying. Not all have been proven, but the sheer volume changed the conversation from maybe to how many. And that's when the name Rodney Lil Rod Jones entered the story. A producer who claimed he lived and worked closely with Diddy for more than a year, Jones alleged an environment filled with drugs, intimidation, sexual misconduct, and coercion. His lawsuit named other celebrities. His claims were explosive. Some parts of his lawsuit were challenged. Some were dismissed. Some remain active. But again, the public didn't care about the legal chess moves. They cared about pattern. And the pattern was this. People who spent extended private time with Diddy were describing similar experiences: fear, control, silence, punishment for disobedience. And the more these stories piled up, the more impossible it became to believe this was a coincidence. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all. If these women experienced this level of abuse, intimidation, and control for years, then someone else had to notice. Assistants, security, executives, staff, friends, people don't live in a vacuum. And yet, nobody spoke. Which brings us back to the silence. Because now, as Diddy faces federal charges and sits behind bars, the women are no longer the ones hiding. Everyone else is. And the closer this case gets to trial, the more pressure builds, not just on Diddy, but on the people who shared his orbit. Because trials don't just expose defendants, they expose systems. And in the final part, we're going to talk about that system, the network, the leverage, and why Hollywood may be more afraid of what Diddy could say than what he's already accused of doing. What makes this story truly unsettling isn't just what Sean Diddy Combs is accused of doing. It's what happens after the fall. Because when someone with that level of power collapses, the danger isn't exposure anymore. It's leverage. For decades, Diddy wasn't just a celebrity or a producer, he was a hub. People came through his world for opportunity, access, protection, and advancement. Careers were built in his orbit. Deals were signed in his rooms. Alliances were formed at his tables. And moments like that don't disappear just because someone gets arrested. They leave behind memories, photos, videos, messages, witnesses, favors, compromises. That's why the fear around this case feels different. It's not just about what prosecutors might prove in court, it's about what could surface if everything comes out. Because if this was truly an alleged enterprise, then Diddy didn't act in isolation. He acted in an ecosystem that rewarded silence and punished defiance. It's about how long something can exist in plain sight before anyone is forced to act. As Diddy sits in federal custody awaiting trial, the public narrative is already sealed. His career is over. His reputation is destroyed. His empire has collapsed. But the story itself isn't finished, because trials don't just punish individuals. They expose structures. And once those structures are exposed, they can't be unseen. The industry is holding its breath right now, hoping this ends with one name, one face, one fall, hoping the damage stays contained. But history tells us that's rarely how it goes. When one domino falls, people start looking for the others. And the question that lingers isn't whether Diddy was a monster. The question is how many people stood close enough to see it and chose to stay quiet. If you believe stories like this shouldn't disappear once the headlines fade, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to I Love Gossip, because this story isn't over and the silence won't last forever.